Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Today we will learn about one more conic section, that is hyperbola. Let us define hyperbola. Hyperbola is the set of all points in a plane, the difference of whose distances from two fixed points in the plane is a constant, or we can say it is the locus of a point which moves in such a way that the difference of distances from two fixed points is constant. The two fixed points are called the foci of the hyperbola. Here we have f1 and f2 as foci of the hyperbola. Now let's take point P1, then the distance P1 f2 minus the distance P1 f1 is equal to the distance P2 f2 minus the distance P2 f1 is equal to the distance P3 f1 minus the distance P3 f2. Here the point P1 is closer to f1 as compared to f2, so we take the difference P1 f2 minus P1 f1, and for point P3 f2 is closer as compared to f1, so we take P3 f1 minus P3 f2. Okay, now the midpoint of the line segment joining the foci is called center of the hyperbola, and the line through the foci is called transverse axis, and the line through the center and perpendicular to the transverse axis is called the conjugate axis. Here the transverse axis is along x-axis and the conjugate axis is along y-axis. The points at which the hyperbola intersects transverse axes are called the vertices of the hyperbola. Now let us denote the distance between the two foci by 2c and the distance between the vertices by 2a. Then 2a is the length of transverse axis. Also let 2b is the length of conjugate axis. Then we have a relation between a, b and c as b square is equal to c square minus a square, or b is equal to square root of c square minus a square. Okay, now we can write the standard equation of hyperbola as if transverse axis is along x-axis and conjugate axis is along y-axis and center of hyperbola is at origin, then equation of hyperbola is x square by a square minus y square by b square equal to 1. Now if transverse axis is along y-axis and conjugate axis is along x-axis, center is at origin, then equation of hyperbola is y square by a square minus x square by b square equal to 1. Also, if length of transverse axis is equal to length of conjugate axis, that is a is equal to b, then the hyperbola is called equilateral hyperbola. So when a is equal to b, we call the hyperbola as equilateral hyperbola. Now let us define lattice rectum of hyperbola. Lattice rectum of hyperbola is a line segment perpendicular to the transverse axis through any of the foci and whose endpoints lie on the hyperbola. Okay, as an ellipse it is easy to show the length of lattice rectum in hyperbola is 2b square divided by a. So if we know the length of semi-transverse axis and semi-conjugate axis, then we can easily find the length of lattice rectum of hyperbola. Okay, Now we define eccentricity of hyperbola. Just like an ellipse, the ratio E equal to C by A is called the eccentricity of hyperbola. Here C is greater or equal to A, so eccentricity is never less than 1. Okay? Or we can define eccentricity as it is the ratio of distances from the center to one of the foci and to one of the vertices of the hyperbola. Okay? Now, in my next lecture, we will do some questions related to hyperbola. Till then, take care of yourself. Thank you.